Okay, so Emmanuel, I have to ask, what was your great unlearning?
Getting rid of fear was the biggest thing for me. So unlearning the concept of fear as a child was the biggest thing for me.
Oh, I can resonate with that so deeply. So I already know it's going to be an absolutely amazing episode. Let's do this.
The UnLearners. Learn, change, learn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to make such a change. The UnLearners. Learn, change, grow.
Hi there, unlearner. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the UnLearners podcast with myself, Zanele Njapa, the unlearning lady. It's amazing to have you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this or to watch this wherever you are streaming it. Today's conversation is no different from all of the other conversations we've had. It's going to be juicy. We're spilling all of the tea, but we're having an amazing conversation that's going to leave you inspired, leaving you feeling like you are a part of a much bigger group of other unlearners who are challenging perspectives of not just society, but sometimes our own perspectives. And today's conversation is no different. This is a person I've invited onto our podcast who I call the contrarian. Like every single time, and I think the last time see, I'm already laughing. The last time we had a conversation, I remember just leaving there going, my goodness, like drinking from a fire hose. This human is like that. So I'm talking about none other than Emanuel Pillay, really a friend of mine, but just someone who I met through obviously the work that I do. But since then, I have just admired your work, admired your contrarian spirit, and how you challenge other people to also unlearn. So Emanuel, thank you so much for being here today.
It's wonderful to be here with you, Z. Thank you for the opportunity, and let's have some fun.
Yes.
Let's do this. Yeah?
Guaranteed. Like, I think that this is going to be really, really good. So maybe let's go all the way back to the beginning. You mentioned that your big unlearning was the fear.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much we can say about that, because when you said that word, there was just a literal goosebumps in me, because we live in that state, don't we? So take me through who you used to be when you were still very fearful, and also maybe tell me how that came about. What was it in your environment that really instilled that sense of fear?
Yeah. So for me, it started very young. I mean, I was growing up in a house that there was 8 of us living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And so it started very young. And as a young kid growing up, when you look at your socioeconomic status compared to your peers, immediately there's a sense of fear and intimidation. And so for me, when I saw that, I was like, this is my life. And there was drugs and alcohol and gangsterism around the neighborhood that I grew up. And I think that just caused a sense of fear as a young boy trying to find his way in the world, trying to be a good Christian young lad. But then the fear gets to you. And what is the fear? The fear of being not enough. The fear of walking around your peers and seeing all of them having fancy Nike tackies, their parents have these fancy properties, and you're not enough. So that immediately leaves a sense of fear and intimidation in me. At an age, I think I was probably 10 and 11, where I realized, something's not kosher here as a young boy.
Oh my goodness. You know what's happening right now in my head is I'm seeing you as a little 8-year-old boy, and as someone who used to be a teacher, and people may not know this, but I used to be a primary school teacher. So I spent a lot of time with these young children. But also what I realized, especially from my own journey, is how young it starts. And you often think that children are so resilient, they'll bounce back, they'll be fine, they can handle it. But actually, at the end of the day, when so many people have conversations like this, you realize that it started very early. Sometimes it was in the playground. Sometimes it was in the classroom. When the teacher said something about you when you wrote on the board. Absolutely. It starts so early. And so when you mention your journey, that at the age of 8 or just growing up, you just started to go, I'm not like other children.
Absolutely.
And how crippling was that? Talk to me about that.
It was very crippling, because in my head, for example, in school, I was fairly good with academics. So I would know the answer to a question.
Yeah.
But because you have this fear and intimidation from your socioeconomic background, and you're growing up with your siblings, and you're the youngest of all these siblings, it tends to cause a lot of tension in your own mind where I could raise my hand and give this teacher the answer, but what if I'm wrong? Or what if I'm not enough? What if everyone laughs at me? So that then immediately gives one the impression I should just keep all of this in. I should just not speak my mind. And from fear, it moved on to being a very timid, quiet young boy. The only time I would say that I would be a beast is when I was on the soccer field. Because when I could really be myself, then literally the playing field was very even for me. And I would control the field. I was myself. So I was a completely different child in that space as opposed to being at home, being in school. And that for me was just about it when it came to my fears and trying to fight those fears. But then when I moved on to an age of between 12 and 15, I started to have a very rude awakening in my life, because then I became this child who was growing into a teen stage and thinking, well, hold on, something's got to give here. Because if I'm going to be changing my environment from near poverty line into a better environment, I need to change. And so I started to have conversations with myself, because I saw my brother running with the drug kids and chasing boys all over the place. And I thought, this is not the life for me. I decided by that age that I need to sort of come out of my shell. As a young boy, I need to be a little bit more firm in who I am. And that's when I sort of made the decision to look at, well, maybe I need to do a little bit more of getting myself out there. I would put my hand up more often. I wasn't afraid. I read more on people communication, dynamics in terms of conversation, how one should, I'm talking about the age of 14 and 15, I used to start to groom myself. And it started to work. I think by the time I was 16 and 17, I think that's who I am today.
Yeah.
The contrarian. In fact, so much so that the teachers actually used to get fed up with me and say, you're clever, but you have a very big mouth.
Yes.
So we need to bring you right in front of the class, and that's where you'll be sitting. And I said to you, they made me the head boy of the school, not because I was the most academic, but because I could speak my mind eventually. But still, they would put me right in front of the class because the teacher said, I need to control you. You're not naughty, but you disrupt the rest of the class.
Something's going on here.
So, and I would still, speak my mind, and I was very vocal. I would get involved in debates. The biggest thing for me was moving from a space of being fearful and conflict, where I would avoid conflict at that young age. Whereas I moved on to a latter stage in my life in high school where I would face conflict. In fact, I would look for it, not in a conflict in a sense of disrespectful, but I would say, let's have the conversation. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Let's have the conversation. And so I took that into the latter years of my life, into my career. And that's basically the person I've become, is where I walk into a room and I walk into a conflict situation and I'm saying, let's have the conversation. Let's not shy away from it.
Wow. I think that was a beautiful, almost overlaying of from your big unlearning, your great unlearning, all of the way to the person that you are building, or the person you are right now, or at least the version of yourself that you are right now. Going into maybe other versions. This is version 3.0. You don't know what else is coming somewhere down the line. But one of the things that I want to almost go back into before we come all the way to the idea of who you are now is just how there's that dissonance that you mentioned, the dissonance between who you, at some parts of you know that I'm actually quite good at this thing, or there's more out there for me. But then there's the voice that says, no, actually, not you. You don't deserve those types of things. You're not the type of person that gets those nice things, or you don't come from the right place, or you're from the other side of town. And it reminds me so starkly of myself, when I was around that very tender age, and this is a weird story. I haven't shared this with you before, but I remember we had, I don't know how, you probably also didn't get tax money like me, but money for tax shop, or what do they call it nowadays? Spending money that you get every day from like an allowance and those type. I never got those things. And I remember at school, we always used to have certain children that could order from the tuck shop because their parents didn't pack them lunch. So they were,
Those kids, yeah.
so they would, and I've got absolutely nothing against those children. It's just that my journey or one of my unlearnings is aligned to a story that has to do with that. So they would order sausage rolls for lunch. And I remember the sausage rolls would come in this container, this circular container, and you would just smell them when it was break time. And I would always have my bread with polony and, and whatever else I
know.
Whatever else I had. And it would always just make me feel, like you said, like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't like the other kids, because I just couldn't be like them. And it hindered my ability to speak up and to express the gift that I now use so freely. So when you said that, it was so powerful. But also it made me realize how much work you must have gone through to get to a place where you are this fearful child, this fearful individual, into a place where you can walk into, you've got a beautiful position at the organization you work at that is fairly senior, but you can walk into organizations and you can walk into spaces and challenge perspectives and not feel like you have to hide. So talk to me a little bit about the groundwork that went into that. And then we'll talk about really understanding the person that you are now.
I think for me as a young child, the saying now is about wokeness, and everyone's talking about being woke. And of course, there's a social element to it. There's the other elements. But when I think about woke, I think, well, it's a good concept because then there's a realization in my mind that something needs to change. And as a young kid, I think I was fairly clever in that sense, where I looked at my surroundings and I thought, well, if I'm going to go to that part, surely it's going to be a part of failure, or drugs or alcohol. And if I'm going to try the other route, which is I'm going to be different. So there was an intentional choice to be different. And that for me is where I started to really unpack who I am, which is one, I started to question my circle. What's the circle of friends do I move in? Do I want to go with the popular cool kids and run off and do all these funny things and then get my parents coming to school? Probably not. Do I want to be a kid where I'll stick to the status quo, but then challenge it? And so I said to myself, I need to educate myself. And at a very young age, I started to take my education a little bit more serious. And then I started reading books outside of the school circular system, which is about coming out. I think I was reading Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People at the age of 14 and 15.
Yeah, wow.
That's crazy. And that stuck with me. And that really helped me to come out of my shell. How to win friends, how to influence people, how to have these conversations, how to walk up to somebody and, introduce yourself. So I started to practice all of these crazy things as a kid. And my mother saw the difference in me and she was like, what is going on with you? Like, okay, Mom. So that for me, the unlearning was a realization within myself, because I can't change the external forces around me, which is the place that I live, the drugs, the alcohol, but I can change who I want to be. That's where it started for me, is to dig deep and ask the question, okay, where do I want to see myself in 5 years?
And start off from there. That's powerful. So who are you now, Manny? Tell us about who you are now.
Just as complicated
as you were back then.
But here's the funny thing. There's still that kid inside of me, and if I walk into a situation, in sales they call it read the room. when you walk into a room, you must quickly read the room. And reading the room is not necessarily a physical room. It's when you're in conversation with somebody. Where is this conversation? What are we doing? What's the environment? So I walk in now, I hold a senior position with a group. That does not change who I am. I'm still someone who would challenge every status quo. I'm still a contrarian, because if I walk into a meeting and there's conversation happening and I say, hold on, what if we try this? What if we do something different? And why I do that is because I've got the experience as a young kid growing up in an environment where there was poverty, there was drugs, and there was alcohol. So I come from an environment where I know we grew up rough, we grew up tough.
Yes.
So if I sit in a boardroom and we're having conversation, I know what street smart is. So for me, it's about trying to be the contrarian in a conversation where everyone's just going with herd behavior, eating from the grass on the side. And then there's this guy that comes in and says, well, let's challenge this. Let's ask the question, why? And so that's how I've been able to build myself in terms of my career and what I want to do, is because I'm a visionary. I truly believe in visionary leadership and what you want to do with yourself and where do you want to take it. And that's what really drives me. I'm extremely motivated about life. I'm extremely motivated to see other people succeed and progress. And that's what excites me. Of course, there's the job and the position and people you work with, and growing your income and growing yourself in the status. But status only lasts for a certain period of time. And I ask myself, what value am I adding to the world? And that is who I am. I'm here to add value. But if I could give myself a title, I'm a change agent. That's who I am. I'll walk in any business, any room, any organization, and I'll say, let's look for change.
So if anyone is listening as we wrap up this conversation and says, I can feel it, I'm a change agent too, it's in there somewhere, what would be maybe the 3-step or 2-step or even 1-step toolkit to getting the courage to be the person who stands up in a room and says, guys, I don't think you noticed this, but here's something we can try, or I don't think that might work. Let's challenge it, or let's shift this perspective. Any pointers you have around that, things that have worked for you?
I have many points, but I'm going to keep it very brief. The first thing is to ask yourself is why. That's where you start, a simple 3-letter word, why. I had to ask myself, why is this happening to me as a kid? It wasn't my fault, but why? And so when you start to ask yourself, why are these things happening to me? Why am I not improving at work? Why aren't my relationships improving? Why? Then you start to realize, instead of blaming the rest of the world around you, the conversation then shifts to yourself. Intrinsically, you tend to ask, why is it happening? And then the mirror then comes a bit closer to you. It's a reflection. When you soon discover it's about you more than it's about them, you then start to realize, I can actually be that change that I'm looking for every day. And when you start looking at that, it really opens up the telescope to be answering the question, well, I could improve my life if I could improve myself. And then second point is it's a shift of your mindset. Because really, Zanele, everybody wants to have a better life. You ask the guy on the street that's begging at the robot, you ask him, do you want a better life? He's going to answer yes. He's going to say yes. The reality is not everyone's willing to work for it. Not everyone's willing to put in that sacrifice. So you start with why. Then you must be able to have a mindset shift to ask yourself, well, it starts with me. I need to improve myself. Because if you improve yourself and you do the research in whatever you're trying to do, whether it's in your organization, in business, your school, your non-profit organization, your sports clubs, you then can be that change. You do your research and you put it out there and you become braver. You've got to be brave. Being a contrarian and being someone that challenges the status quo means you've got to be brave. And if you're not brave enough, well, then you've got to become brave.
I think those steps that you've mentioned are a great place to start, is to internalize or maybe look within and say, what is it in me that I can leverage in order to step up? Or how can I be more self-aware, I think as well is another perspective to take on it.
And it's intentional, right? Change is not something that you just let happen to you, because it is happening.
Yes.
Change is inevitable. It's necessary, but it can happen without you. You've got to be intentional about it to say, well, I am going to take charge and start it myself. That's where it is.
I love it. What a beautiful note to end off on, a note of accountability and taking charge, especially when it comes to the change journey that needs intentionality, but not just intentionality, consistency, which is what really builds a new identity. Because unless at the brain level, you've built consistency around those new neural pathways you want to create, they're not going to last. They're going to prune, and then your default is going to be the way you always did things. And you're going to find yourself right back where you started. Yeah. Thank you so much, Emanuel,
Thank you
for your
It's
time.
been fun.
Yeah, it has. Hey, I wish I could go longer. We could talk about a lot more stories and a few more other things. But thank you so much. This beautiful gift right here is for you to say thank you for being who you are, for being an unlearner that helps other people to know that it's possible, but also that shines a light on how it's done, on what it's like to be a contrarian, what it's like to be the person who pushes the envelope. It's not always fun, right?
Not
but
always.
you know why you do it. So I think that's beautiful. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and it's been fun, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This won't be the last time we talk. Like it never is the last time we talk with any unlearners. Please feel free to go over and subscribe to this particular podcast, rate and review us. Let us know what you think about our episodes, how you're feeling about everything. Are you enjoying our guests? And make sure to also follow our guests and their journeys, because these are people that are actually, they're real, real people that you can actually connect with and create relationships with and learn from, but also exchange learnings. Because that's a beautiful thing about the guests that we have on the show, is that they are actual people who want to learn from other people. That's it for this episode of the UnLearners podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. And it's myself, Zanele Njapa, the unlearning lady, saying goodbye until next time.
The UnLearners. Learn, change, relearn. I think if you take one courageous step and it's going to be such the UnLearners. Learn, change, grow. The UnLearners. Learn, change, relearn. I think if you take one courageous step and it's going to be such the UnLearners. Learn, change, grow.
Why this podcast? Why this podcast? Okay, I really like that question. Here's the reason why this podcast makes a difference. It's because I believe that each and every person has that one mindset, that one behavior, that when you unlearned it, everything in your life changed. Like you almost became a different person. So much so that you can even split your entire life between before you unlearned this mindset or behavior and then after you unlearned it, when everything became completely different. And I feel that that journey of unlearning is what unites individuals. We are united in the idea that we've all had to push against a perspective that was either suggested to us, maybe very strongly, by our parents, by our society, our community, or even our teachers and our mentors, that we had to actually push against. And when we meet on the UnLearners podcast, we have conversations and we meet as individuals who collectively have shared experiences of challenging those perspectives. And I believe that when you come into this space, it helps you to feel like you are seen and you are heard, but also it gives you tools and strategies that help you keep moving in your unlearning journey. Who is the podcast for? Well, I think it becomes really self-explanatory, right? This podcast is for the everyday unlearner, whoever you are. You could be listening from the perspective of an organization and you want to shake things up. You want to build a culture where your people jump into change in a more excited, easy, and fun way. Or you could be listening just from the perspective of an everyday individual who is looking to be a lot more flexible in your day-to-day life in terms of how you learn, in terms of how you navigate your life, and maybe even transition from being one version of yourself to a completely different one. That's who this podcast is for. If you believe you're an unlearner, then this podcast is for you.
What can people expect to hear from you?
So unlearners that listen and even watch this podcast can expect both guidance, but they can also expect tools and practical tips. Now, I work extensively as a neurocoach, which means that I understand how to change in accordance with neuroscience, or how your brain actually works. So you'll not only get those amazing tips, but you'll also get the stories of my guests who are real life unlearners on the ground that will inspire you, that will motivate you, that will encourage you, but also teach you how to keep going on your personal journey. And maybe one day you get to sit in the chair with me and be the unlearner that we focus on.
Where can people watch and listen to the podcast?
So literally anywhere that you listen and watch podcasts is where you can find our podcasts. I'm talking Apple Podcasts, Google Play, I'm talking all of the platforms. Spotify, YouTube are all different platforms where you can watch and stream the podcast. So whatever feels comfortable and most authentic for you is where you can start engaging in the journey with the rest of the unlearners across the world.
The UnLearners. Learn, change,
Learn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to be such
the UnLearners. Learn, change, grow.